now it looks like a consolidated, focused, small panel. So we have already introduced ourselves with each other. We know Mr. Vikram Gulati. He's representing Toyota. He's country head, and focus is, I think, communication, public relations, CSR. Everything is being handled by him at this point in time. With the world's largest car manufacturer next to him is Mr. Vijay Sethi. Of course, we know the world's largest two-wheeler manufacturer. It's interesting. It's privileged to have two largest manufacturers along with Mr. Anirban Ghosh, who is
world's largest tractor manufacturer.
Tractor manufacturer. So yeah, I'm privileged to have all of you together on a focused conversation, which is going to be on environment sustainability. And that's where the talk started from, when you mentioned Parali being burnt somewhere, and it becomes a responsibility of a corporation to take care of it as a responsible citizen. So moving on from the responsibility to the sustainability part, CSR becomes a part of sustainability. I have been defining corporate social responsibility and sustainability, CSR, as a part of sustainability. You can't be sustainable if you don't do CSR. You can't be sustainable if you're not looking at the environmental resources that you are using. Obviously, we know the definition of sustainability. We'll not get into that. I call sustainability as something like a daily hygiene. You have to take bath, you have to brush your teeth, and you have to be sustainable to do business in India. So that makes sense to all corporations, and we know the significance of that as well. So talking of sustainability, there are carbon footprints that manufacturing brings about. All of us are into manufacturing of different products, two-wheeler industries, four-wheeler manufacturings, and Mahindra Group. There are so many verticals that are having their own carbon footprints. And all of us, all three of these companies have mentioned in their sustainability reports that by 2030, we're looking at contributing to SDGs, and we might go carbon neutral. That's what we're looking at. So how are we going to go about it? Before we go to how, do you think it is possible for any manufacturing company as large as ours to be sustainable, to be carbon neutral? We'll start with Mr. Gulati and move on to Mr. Sethi and then Anirban.
So definitely it is possible. I think it's all about setting your priorities. And like you said, it's about looking at it in a much more holistic manner. For instance, in Toyota 2050, our global vision document that came out for the environment basically clearly lays out a very clear roadmap for zero carbon, not only from manufacturing, but also from our products, but also from the life cycle. So therefore, what we have challenged ourselves is, by 2050, can we reach a stage where we are carbon neutral from the entire value chain, from the cradle to the grave? So that is, of course, a very challenging activity. It involves not only looking at how do you make zero carbon from the manufacturing point of view, but also subsequently from a point of view of the product also. As a part of this challenge we have other three challenges, which are around trying to reduce or minimize the water usage, undertake recycling, and also create a society that lives in harmony with nature. Just some facts on the fact to prove that it can be done. It is possible and it is definitely doable. Is the fact that in the financial year 2019, for which we've accumulated the data, 93.35% of our total energy requirement was met from renewables, which kind of helped us save around 45,000 tons of carbon. On a cumulative basis, since we began, that accounts to more than 206,000 tons of carbon. Besides this, we've done huge amount of greening with more than 3 lakh trees being planted in the plant. So to come to your point, the key really is setting a vision and getting everybody involved. And subsequently, what you realize is when you start to explore it, go deep into it in terms of looking at it as one of your core activities, you realize that this is not only makes sense from a social perspective, from an environment perspective, from being responsible, but it also makes business sense in the long term, because you can get people to be actively involved. And once people are actively involved, you get great ideas in terms of looking at how to reduce energy, how to be energy usage? How do you make more efficient use of energy? How do you eliminate the use of energy? And then, of course, the bit about renewable energy can come in. So I think it is definitely doable, and it's on. The only thing that you need is a clear vision, top leadership, ownership, which then gets you a buy-in from everybody in the organization.
Mr. Sethi, on this, obviously you'll agree that company can become sustainable, but how do we go about it?
I fully agree with Mr. Gulati. See, it's not a question of whether a company can become sustainable. I think all the big organizations are working very aggressively towards sustainability. It's not something which is an option or something which is being forced upon, but organizations are wanting to do it and they are doing it. If I look at from our perspective, so today as of now, as we speak, so we are around 270% water positive across. So whatever water we consume, so we kind of recycle or rainwater harvesting or otherwise, 270% already there. And as far as waste is concerned, maybe out of 6 plants that we have in India, 4 of them are already 100% waste neutral. Okay. And similarly on carbon, there's a huge amount of work which is being done. We may not be there at this stage. We are around 30% carbon. But again, the focus that's there, and there's a roadmap that by a particular year, 2030, will be carbon neutral. By 2025 will be 500% water neutral, and there are other milestones that are there. In today's time, it actually makes a lot of business sense to do these things. It's not that you are just doing it because someone else is doing it. Because to my mind, it's the right behavior of the organization. It is also, from an employee perspective, it gives them a huge amount of kick that yes, my organization is something which believes in sustainability. Because employees of today are also wanting to focus on whether it's sustainability, CSR, the entire social piece has really picked up in a big way. And last piece I'll say is from a carbon neutrality perspective, we are giving a huge focus on greenery. So some of our plants actually we call as garden factories. In one of our plants, we have world's largest green roof. Also outside our plants, in plant there's a huge amount of greenery which is there. And today I'm sitting in a plant, some function that we had. So outside plants, we have planted as of now roughly around 23.5 lakh trees. We have 92% survival rate. So that again is contributing to a huge amount of oxygen generation. So a short answer, yes, companies can do it, companies should do it, and companies are doing it.
Anyone will move on to you the same question. Yes, I know the answer, but we want you to elaborate on that one. Then we'll go into the specifics. There'll be some questions around water conservation, energy conservation, and we want to know some case studies or something that other companies can understand or learn from the large corporations. Anyone will you? Over to you.
Your question is what I was asked sometime in 2016 when I made my first presentation on our company becoming carbon neutral. And that's the question I was asked by our managing director, Dr. Pawan Goenka at that time, who himself is an engineer par excellence. So he said, technically this doesn't sound possible. So just because and I just moved to sustainability. Just because you've gone from business to sustainability, don't start saying all sorts of things which are not possible. So I just spoke to him and said, a year ago I wouldn't believe it either. But now it seems that this is not so difficult, that it can be done. And we are actually moving quite rapidly in that direction without knowing that we are rapidly moving in that direction. But I'll leave it for now. We'll talk again later. So a couple of years later, the conversation came up again. By that time, more preparations had been made, more progress had happened. I guess there were many more fora where the conversation had happened. And I still remember when we were doing the presentation and doing the numbers as to what is our emission likely to be business as usual, therefore what is our energy consumption likely to be, and so on. And what are the steps that we can take, what's the impact it will have, how much emissions will we be able to reduce, and how much will be left over for residual emissions left over for sequestration. The numbers looked very good, and by that time we would have done maybe 1,000, 2,000 projects on energy efficiency. So we had very good understanding of the returns that both energy efficiency and renewable energy provide. And no questions were asked on, okay, so what's the investment that's going to be required, simply because every rupee put in gave you returns which were often greater than the EBITDA of the business if you put it in renewable energy or you put it in energy efficiency. And so we went ahead and made the commitment that we would be a carbon neutral organization by 2040. In fact, that commitment was made at the Global Climate Action Summit. We had done only the numbers for our largest company, M&M Limited. And we briefed Mr. Mahindra that, okay, we can make this commitment. Mr. Mahindra again got taken up by the entire atmosphere of Global Climate Action Summit and said, our whole group will become carbon neutral. And I was wondering, good God, I haven't done numbers for the rest of them. But fortunately, the story that was that had been built for Mahindra and Mahindra could just be replicated elsewhere. Some places it's a little bit more difficult. You've got us all from the automotive industry broadly. So we are all in a similar situation. But if you were in steel or you were in cement or you were in, if you were a trucking company, it would be a little bit more difficult for you at that time because the technologies are not yet available. But if tomorrow we have clean hydrogen available, it's very easy for them to become carbon neutral. Then it's not difficult anymore. So, yes, of course, it can be done. And all of us, I suppose, are heading in the same direction. There are only three levers to pull: energy efficiency, renewable energy, sequestration. By that, you will do 100% or you will do 99%. Some other lever comes up very good.
So I was coming to that one only. So like being focused at, so to go carbon neutral, that's the biggest challenge. We have companies that have become water positive, like Hero MotoCorp is water positive. I want to know from Mr. Gulati, are we going to be water positive at some point in time? Probably Mahindra might also be. The carbon neutrality part is the toughest part because we'll have to use energy, we'll have to consume it, and then we'll have to sequester it outside because there is only as much we can sequester within the organization or within the group. The first thing that I want to know from three of you is, like, have we actually figured out what are our carbon footprints? Like annually, X number of carbon footprints these are our carbon footprints, and this much is needed to be sequestered either using technology within the company, the solutions within the company, or say going towards building up carbon sinks or going towards agroforestry models or planting. So, Anirban, we'll start from you again and then we will go on to Mr. Gulati. So, yes.
Scope 1 and Scope 2 are easy to do. All of us must have done it by now. Scope 3 is somewhat more difficult to do. However, there are some 15 different kinds of items in Scope 3. If you figure out which ones are your biggest, it is not difficult to estimate. And then you look at, okay, what alternative solutions do we have to reduce Scope 3 emissions? In fact, when we say carbon neutrality, Scope 1, Scope 2 will all get there. We'll all get there maybe by 2030 or so. We may be saying 2040, 2035, we'll get there faster. Because once the cost of batteries becomes just a little bit lower, and I believe the threshold is going to get crossed sometime in 2025, 26, this whole thing is just going to take off at a speed faster than any of us can imagine, simply because it will be the right business decision to take. And so we'll all, Scope 1, Scope 2, we'll all crack it. Scope 3, we'll have a few challenges. For example, we'll have to figure out, okay, is there a more environment-friendly way of doing mining for the materials that we use? We'll have to figure out, okay, so what do we do with all the logistics, emissions from logistics? I mean, do we have clean energy vehicles available for us or not? And for organizations like us who are going to be manufacturing those clean energy vehicles, we are looking very hard to see when can we make and how can we make clean energy vehicles viable for consumers. Because the more they become viable for consumers, all of us start moving towards becoming carbon neutral on Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. wherever we can take action now, I'm sure all of us are taking action. So logistics optimization, packaging optimization, travel. In fact, many of us had already started looking at travel, seeing what needs to be done, what can be done without traveling, and what needs to be done with traveling. VCs, we'd all bought lots of video conferencing equipment. Now, thanks to Zoom and Teams, they'll probably not be required. In fact, I had a conference room being built, and before the disruption, everything had been done except putting in the video conferencing equipment. And I'm very certain now there will be no video conferencing equipment over there.
It is a very nice background. Is it a background, or is it like you are somewhere? It's like very English behind you.
It is a background. My house isn't exactly as clean as all of this.
Nice, interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So as I was saying, the things we can do in Scope 3, we are doing already, and we are trying to scale it up. But there are technical solutions required if we have to become carbon neutral in Scope 3.
Okay. Mr. Sethi.
I fully agree with what Mr. Ghosh said. See, Scope 1, yes, easier. Scope 2 slightly difficult, but Scope 1 and 2 organizations are taking care of this. Scope 3 is, to my mind, as especially electric vehicles and the amount of electrification within the auto industry and within the country goes up, Scope 3 would be slightly becoming easier. But as of now, I think from a carbon neutrality perspective, almost all organizations are first concentrating on Scope 1 and Scope 2. And then moving on to Scope 3, whatever best can be done, I think organizations will do it. But some of it would also be dependent upon changing the behavior of end users. The guys who use the entire in the value chain, so whether it is on this side of the value chain or on the other side of the value chain, with right from our vendors to our dealers to going forward, I think while there will be some actions, but to my mind, organizations will have to do huge action on changing the mindset over there. And that's where the focus on Scope 3 would be. That's how I see. But Scope 1 and Scope 2 is something, yes, all of us are taking suitable actions, and also like what one is doing outside from a carbon neutrality perspective on, say, planting trees and things like that. I just want to take 1 minute and share as to what we are doing from electricity consumption perspective.
Yeah.
So we are actually changing a lot of villages, and then you know this, into LED villages. So where we are today saving roughly around 40 to 45 million units of electricity every year outside, so in Uttarakhand and in other states. So where it's not just our own value chain, but in the country as such, the generation of electricity or consumption of electricity goes down significantly. And this is direct consumption, and beyond that is what we do from a solar light perspective. So I'm not even counting those numbers, but directly whatever is there. So if I have a CFL light, and villages had CFL lights, we converted that, and the Uttarakhand government has formally recognized. So it's not a number which I'm just pulling out of head, but Uttarakhand government has formally given us a certificate saying that we are kind of saving that kind of electricity and put us as Urja Ke Hero. So that's how they are put.
It's nice. I know about that Urja Ke Hero initiative. After that, a lot of companies picked up and they started investing in LEDs initiatives as well at villages. So, moving on to Mr. Gulati, I'll have to twist this question a bit here, because yes, we have understood Scope 1, Scope 2. Scope 1 is quite easy for companies to obtain. Scope 2 is quite difficult. Scope 3 looks difficult by 2050 if technology changes and if there are solutions around, we can do that. From Toyota's perspective, I don't know, like from a layman's, I'm just layman as far as sustainability reports of companies are concerned. We've just been reading the overview of the reports. I want to understand, is Toyota actually looking at, say, Scope 2, I wouldn't say Scope 1, by 2030 or 2050? And it's just not from India perspective. I'm looking at it because being the world's largest four-wheeler manufacturer, you can actually create a story around that, how a four-wheeler manufacturing company became sustainable. So, is there a roadmap or say plan on paper somewhere around it?
Like I said, our global vision, which came out in 2015 for sustainability, basically outlines our roadmap to achieve zero life cycle carbon, not just product from the product point of view or manufacturing life cycle. So it takes into account the bit. It also will need to count the bit about mining, raw material creation, your manufacturing, then all the logistics in between, then the operation side of the product that you manufacture, and finally to the grave in terms of end of life and getting rid of the product. So our aspiration is to reach zero life cycle by the year 2050. That's why I said this particular goal is very challenging because it goes beyond your borders. So if you look at from a product side, what we're saying is we want to reach near zero carbon. There's a reason for it. You see, even if you talk about, let's say, electric mobility, today electric mobility produces zero carbon if it is linked purely to renewable. But for India, for instance, even today, we have made very good progress in renewable energy, and our target to renewable energy is 175 gigawatt by 2022, and recently Prime Minister announced 450 gigawatt by 2030, with the idea of having installed capacity which becomes bigger than the fossil fuel based energy generation. However, given the fact that renewable is periodical, for example, sun is there for a certain part of the day, wind may or may not be there. As per government's own calculations, the energy generation is going to be primarily focused around coal for some time to come, 2035 or so. Maybe there will be a change that happens around a later date, around 2040 or thereabouts. Those are the numbers that are there in the public domain. If you look at what Niti Aayog says or what IEA or many other agencies say. Now, given the state of our transmission, what you really need to look at from a product side is not the tailpipe impact. A tailpipe impact is, straightforward, a no-brainer. It's going to be zero from a BEV. But that's not the real. You really got to see the world is one. It's not around, the world doesn't exist around the tailpipe. The world exists around where the energy generation is taking place.
True.
So carbon will be coming out somewhere unless you tackle it on a holistic well-to-wheel or on a life cycle perspective. You are adding carbon. So even on a well-to-wheel calculation, even there's a report out yesterday by Nomura. There are many reports out there which basically says that for a country like ours, there is still a challenge. And this challenge is going to exist around a time frame which is much longer than what we are talking about. Even if there is a technological shift happening around the powertrain or the drivetrain around the vehicles that we drive around. So from that perspective, one has to see that how do you reach your part of the story despite these limitations which are beyond your zone of control. So it's not just about trying to minimize the carbon through efforts like energy efficiency or eliminating the use of energy or going into renewables. It's also by, like what was mentioned earlier, by seeing how can you add positives. Positives are around, like, for instance, afforestation, putting in a lot of green cover. That also gets counted. So I think going forward, the third piece is going to be a bit more complicated and a bit more challenging, primarily because a lot of the stuff that needs to happen lies beyond the scope or the locus of control of many of us. Even if we wish to make it zero, it lies beyond that. It's a larger issue at play.
Thank you. So for laymen like me, I should understand, if I am buying an electric vehicle, I'm in somewhere in the Western country or in Europe primarily, and where the renewable energy is more, so I'm making sense. But if I'm going for electric within the country where it is being charged from the power which is coming from thermal power plants, of course, it doesn't make sense.
It definitely makes sense in a country like, let's say, Norway, where it's predominantly renewable. But it also makes, you got to compare it with the baseline. What are you comparing against? For example, if you're comparing against a traditional petrol or diesel, it may still make a sense. But if you start comparing it against, let's say, a CNG or a strong hybrid or perhaps some other alternative, like say ethanol, there are many alternatives, then you'll have a very different answer. So today electric is definitely not the lowest carbon on a well-to-wheel basis. That is a fact.
May well be, Ranjan. Vikram is possibly right.
Yes.
But you and I won't be buying electric vehicles because they are cleaner or not cleaner. We'll buy them because they are the better vehicles to buy. They will be more fun to drive. They will be awesome vehicles, far better than petrol and diesel vehicles. The energy conversion efficiency will be of an order of magnitude you cannot imagine for internal combustion engines. But that's why we will buy. That's the consumer value proposition. Will it solve the environment problem? It is closely linked with the cleanness of the energy.
Talking about...
Sorry, Ranjan, just 1 second. I'll just add over there. I agree with both of them. See, what is also happening in the country is there's a huge focus which is being given on renewable. And with the cost of renewables really coming down to 2 rupees, 1 rupee 60 paisa, 90 paisa, the amount is, I think, just imagine after a couple of years when electric increases, right now it's a fraction. By that time, even the percentage of renewables in the entire ecosystem would also go up. And that is where your question of thermal in country today, but what you are not looking at is portion of renewables 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line.
I think, if I may just come in, the bigger issue is moving away from personal mobility altogether. Because it doesn't make sense, whether it's ICE or electric or whatever. One has to move towards mass transit. One has to move towards public transportation. And that's why most of the companies, including Toyota, are looking at themselves as more like mobility solution providers now. Because it's not just about making better, more efficient, cleaner vehicles, whether they're electric or whether they're hydrogen or whatever. But it's also about bringing in this whole paradigm of efficiency, which comes around mass mobility as compared to, let's say, individual mobility. So that's another piece which we are right now, I think, not really focusing on. The efficacy of reduction of the emissions from transportation per se itself will come around more, and also significantly from when you start shifting away from personal transportation towards public. So that is another element which, again, it's something that, most of the companies will be looking at, I guess, as we move down, because as the shift happens, there is definitely also a shift towards shared mobility, which is definitely something that government is also encouraging, and it makes sense.
Interesting coming from a car manufacturing company to talk about moving from personal mobility to shared mobility. That means, yes, the thought process at corporations, people like me who are outside companies who are but socially responsible and conscious consumers, and there is a very small fraction of it, and they're constantly increasing steadily. There are questions from consumers coming up: should we be associating with so and so company because it's not carbon neutral, it's not sustainable, or it's not environment friendly? So that fraction of consumers are also going up. So those are the people who are also looking at moving from, say, cutting down their emissions, their personal emissions. So yes, they look at shared mobility, they look at public transport, and they're not looking at. So does it make business sense when we talk about sustainability making business sense? Now we're talking about the mindset change. There might be individuals who will stop buying four-wheelers or even two-wheelers at some point in time because the public transport would increase. Would that at that point in time, this vision make sense to us? Because it doesn't make business sense.
You've got to look at it from a broader. Sorry,
no, go on, Vikram. Go on.
You've got to look at it from a broader perspective. You've got to look at it from a point of view of right now. You've got to look at it from a point of view of this being a business opportunity. Everybody has to see just beyond the current business they operate in, with the evolving ecosystem that's there, and rediscover themselves. So that's why, Toyota last year basically also announced that we would like to look ourselves as a mobility company. It's nothing as different as, let's say, Shell or Oil India looking at themselves as an energy company, rather than, let's say, a fossil fuel business company, either in the business of refining or dispensing oil. So it's how you kind of look at yourself in a certain paradigm shift that is happening around you, that is more important to see. There would be obviously some downturns to it, but there would also be a lot of opportunities that you can discover, and new value avenues that you can look at being created.
Nirban, you had to add something onto that.
If you do an MBA in marketing, one of the first articles they make you read is an article called Marketing Myopia by Ted Levitt. It's a very old article, what, 1960s or earlier. And he talks about the railway industry and says that one of the reasons why the railway industry in developed countries like US and others didn't do very well is because they saw themselves as a railway company and not as a transportation company. Now, all of us have gone through MBA school at some point in time or the other. We've all read Ted Levitt. So now that this question is facing our businesses, the oil and gas business or the automobile business, very easily we are talking about a transition to energy, a transition to mobility, and we are being able to look at the problem with a much wider lens than otherwise. And we are not going to be making better rat traps, shall we say, when the rat trap is no longer required. But at the same time, there are some issues that have been baked into the system. And those issues are related to the way our cities are built. So when I engage in conversations on sustainable urbanization, I try to imagine our existing cities as being places where people like you and I can manage without a vehicle. It's very difficult. Yeah. When I travel to a New York or a London, my schedule allows me not to step into a taxi. Yeah, I don't have to. I can use the underground, I can walk because of the way the place is constructed, and I can get my work done. But I cannot do that in Bombay. If somebody travels to Bombay and has 2 meetings in the day, one in South Bombay and one in even Andheri, let's say, that's the end of the day. And if he tries public transport, poor fellow, we can only sympathize with his situation. So the way the cities have been built actually prevent us from moving away from personal vehicles. And at worst, if we move away from personal vehicles, we cannot move away from automobiles. So since most of the cities cannot be reconfigured, we will be stuck with automobiles. However, there is something common between, let's say, an Airbnb and an Uber and the broader concept of shared mobility. And that concept has been practiced in our factory forever. It is called asset utilization. So we end up creating assets which are underutilized. For a while it doesn't matter. Then you figure out, I can create value from all of this, and a business pops up. So you heard of BlaBlaCar, where if I'm traveling from, say, Bombay to Pune in my own car, I put out a little information somewhere and ask, are you also traveling? You can travel with me. Yeah, it's shared mobility on a much larger scale. Now, these are all ways of asset utilization. Underlying all of this is the fact that what matters is vehicle kilometers traveled. Will that go up or go down? And what will the number of vehicles be required if the same number of vehicle kilometers were to be catered to in a shared mobility situation? The numbers still look good. There is an additional problem which actually enables shared mobility, which is congestion. Now, if you cannot reconfigure Bombay and you cannot reconfigure Calcutta, and you cannot, though they are trying to reconfigure Delhi, that still has some space, I'm told. If you cannot reconfigure, there is only so many vehicles you can put up there. So 20 years ago, when I came into Bombay, I could travel to Dahisar from Bandra with flyovers being built in about an hour and 15 minutes. Today, I can't travel from Bandra to Dahisar with all the flyovers in 1 hour 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the place is getting more and more and more full, and there is only so much you will be able to put out there. And then you will say, hey, we need fewer vehicles, so why not shared mobility? So the two competing pressures of design of the city and congestion and inability to reconfigure is going to push us all towards shared mobility, and we will have to then cater to, and that is the ecosystem. That's not what the automobile manufacturer controls. So then we'll have to cater to that. We have to find solutions for that. And we will have
you out here, Anirudh. I'll have to cut you out because we are running short of time. We have to conclude it by 5 times. So I'll throw a last one. Picking up from reconfiguring, you said they still have space in Delhi and they might try to reconfigure Delhi. Bombay is sea-locked, it doesn't have space. Kolkata is already congested. We don't want them to reconfigure Delhi because there is only this much space left, which is like the heart of Delhi, which is like the lungs of Delhi, in fact. We are like running campaigns around it, and we want companies that have not been able to sequester their carbon to go out, plant, get into agroforestry. Remember, the last talk we both had was focused at carbon sinks, how companies can move towards sequestering and invest in carbon sinks. Because this issue is, the cover story is primarily focused at carbon sinks, how companies should start looking at sequestering carbon, how they can get into the agroforestry model. And I think last year or probably early January, from 24 odd companies signed a MOU. I think Mahindra was part of that as well, with the Ministry of Environment and Forests to support their initiatives focused at afforestation and planting. So are Toyota, Hero MotoCorp or Mahindra also looking at, say, expanding their network of green cover, investing in planting, focused planting along with maybe farmers, because we don't have enough of forest left. We'll have to engage in the agroforestry model and focus on that. So some plans around that, and how much can it help in actual sequestration of carbon from our footprints? We can start with anybody. Mr. Gulati, please.
Yeah, we are looking at this. In fact, we have been doing certain activities. Green Wave is one activity we did some time back. And the other thing that we're trying to do in a big way is getting employees involved, and through them, their families involved. In terms of the whole idea is around, initially started with getting...
Sorry, Mr. Gulati, your voice is a bit low. We will have to probably come closer to the mic. Yeah, better.
Yeah. So I was saying that, we have been kind of working in this area, and we've also been seeing how to leverage employee volunteerism that we've been, kind of promoting to also facilitate this issue of environment. That is one of the levers that we operate in. So through our employee volunteerism program, environment happens to be one of the key theme areas where we encourage employees to undertake this. We support them, and we also try and get their families involved. So the whole idea is to spread it beyond just the activities that a company is doing. In addition, what we've done recently, which comes around the theme, our 6 goals, the 6th goal, living in harmony with nature. What we've done is we've created a 25-acre green area theme park called EcoZone within the plant. It has 17 theme parks around various aspects of environment sustainability. It goes into issues about carbon emissions, the local plants, herbs, medicinal plants, recycling. There's a whole lot of educational, practical facilities that are available, and our objective is to try and get as many kids to be involved. We have around 8,000 kids who already visited this. We find that these kids are very impressionable. So if they are able to see, feel and understand, their appreciation of concepts improves. the whole idea is to see if you can convert a young mind to think in the right direction. Here, environment being one of the key themes. So if you've managed to do that, you've already, kind of got an environment warrior ready who would make a difference. So it is to sum up, through our own activities beyond our boundaries, through our employee volunteerism program that we aggressively follow, and also through larger community outreach through the education program. EcoZone is one of the such very impactful activity that we've done recently. This is how we are trying to go beyond and try to see that the community as a large can become much more aware and much more sensitive and much more contributing towards the environment.
Going towards the planting part, I precisely wanted to know, like, if we will be getting into agroforestry or say planting model to create carbon sinks, because that's the area wherein we can channelize corporate social responsibility funds. It qualifies as CSR, you're getting into agroforestry, you're getting into planting, and then it also helps us in sustainability because it gives us carbon credits, or say that it cuts down our carbon footprints. So is there anything on charts or on cards from Toyota's point of view? Are you getting into that?
In fact, since right now we're focusing largely on a huge area that we have within the plant, and we have done that. There's a huge plantation that's happened in the plant, and beyond that, this 25 acres that I'm talking about within the eco zone also has seen huge plantation taking place. This is dense plantation. This is like Miyazaki, the methodology of afforestation, which is very impactful in terms of density of afforestation that you get, and hence its impact in terms of soaking up carbon, and from that impact point of view, it is much good. Once we complete this, of course, we'll be evaluating how to go beyond the borders.
Very interesting. And then the education part, engaging with children and having these 8,000 warriors or say eco warriors that you're talking about, it's a very similar initiative that we started with Hero MotoCorp, and tomorrow we'll be launching a second phase of it. It's called Young Earth Heroes. The idea is again the same, to impact the child, like just catch them young and engage them with environmental activities so they become conscious and aware citizens. I'll come back to you on that, because in the earlier session we were talking about corporate partnerships, getting together and scaling up the initiative. Now both of us, Toyota's and Hero MotoCorp, have a similar objective of reaching out to young children and making them eco warriors, and they should be more conscious and sustainable consumers. So that's apart from this conversation that we are having. Mr. Sethi, again, the same question that I had asked Mr. Gulati, getting into creation of carbon sinks outside the corporate and creating, say, getting into agroforestry or forestry models, planting models. Are we looking at that in the coming years?
I think if one has to become carbon neutral, that is one of the biggest ways of ensuring carbon neutrality. So, as far as we are concerned, it makes a lot of sense from 2 or 3 things. Number one, of course, it helps you in becoming carbon neutral. Secondly, it also helps in ensuring that your end beneficiary or farmers, their own income goes up. So which means that the entire thing becomes sustainable and their own livelihood becomes sustainable over there. So if you plant some fruit trees in an area which is, or a farm which is owned by a particular farmer, the amount of money that you start getting by second year onwards or third year onwards actually kind of helps the farmer. And the third advantage which I see in this entire thing is the survival rate of any such plantation is much more than the survival rate of other plantations, for the simple reason that the farmer or the beneficiary owns it like his own kid, and they'll take care of it. So wherever we have done our own plantations along with the farmers, we actually see a hit rate of almost 100%, because it's not my accountability or responsibility to ensure that the entire thing survives, but I have a partner who is sitting over there who is owning even much more than what I am owning. So in all the 3 cases, whether it is a carbon sink, whether it is the livelihood or the entire survivability, agroforestry to me makes a lot of sense. And the last point I'll say is, even from a country perspective, if you look at India as such, The number of trees is what, 28 or 29 trees per person over here in India, whereas there are countries which go up to 7, 8, 9,000 trees. So more the number of trees that we plant, it really helps the environment, irrespective of carbon, and we are actually doing it for the society. So in all ways, this actually makes sense, and we are already doing it, and we'll be scaling it up further.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sethi. Nirman, again, the same thing coming to you. You have had some successful case studies to share around creation of carbon sinks by Mahindra, and something on that. Yes, probably the pilot that has become successful, and you can share how it has been helping in carbon sequestration as well.
Ranjan, between Vikram and Vijay, the entire case study has been written. It has been explained. All the benefits have been told to you. So all I will do is add an appendix which will give you numbers from one example. So when the organization turned 60, we committed to plant 1 million trees a year. They are planted in exactly the model Vijay talked about in the Araku Valley of Andhra Pradesh. The trees that we plant there, for the reasons that Vijay mentioned, have very high survival rate. Other places, they don't have such high survival rate. These trees are planted either on an acre of barren land belonging to a farmer, or they are planted as shade trees in the older coffee plantations, again belonging to the tribal farmers. As a result of this, the income increase for each individual farmer household has been in excess of 70 to 80% from the time the project started. If you like drinking coffee, then India now has an international standard coffee called Araku coffee, which is sold in France, it's sold in Australia, it's sold in Ireland, and it's sold in some restaurants and cafes of India. This Araku coffee is special because the fruit trees that have been used as shade trees lend the coffee beans a particular taste which a lot of coffee drinkers really like. Of course, like it happens with any brands like this, Araku is a very large place. We do our plantation in one corner, so the coffee that comes out of there has this particular taste. But there are other places in Araku which is also sold as Araku coffee which may not have that taste. But that's a separate story. The main story, the appendix for you, 1 million trees a year, Araku Valley, social forestry, 80% increase in income. Continuing, as right now the corpus is about 17 million trees there. If I end up managing CSR monies again, my dream is from 1 million, we'll take it to 2 million trees a year. Because every time I go to Araku Valley, the only question that the tribals ask me is, why aren't you planting more trees in this area?
Great. So I should be concluding it here. We are at 5:22. We were supposed to wind up at 5:10. Thank you so much to all our panelists. So I'll just make quick 5 pointers or 2 pointers, whatever I've just noted down. First, yes, carbon sequestration is possible. Going carbon neutral is possible. As of now, we just have Infosys claiming to be the carbon neutral company, and I hope over the years we'll have more organizations going forward and just announcing their carbon neutrality and going more sustainable. Sequestration is possible outside through agroforestry model. All of the companies should focus primarily at balancing their corporate social responsibility and sustainability initiatives, and maybe just channelize some of their CSR funds into agroforestry models and look at carbon sequestration from there. That's about it, and we'll have this recording put on our YouTube channel, which will soon be launching, and Padma has been taking notes. The story from our conversations will be created and will be shared in the magazine, in the upcoming issue of Cause Because magazine. If I have more queries, if I have to ask you more to have more inputs on the talk which we have had, we'll reach out to you via emails and we'll ask more. Probably we'll get on the telecons as well. Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. Thank you, Mr. Gulati, Mr. Sethi, Revan Ghosh. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I request you to join us tomorrow as well. We'll be having a conversations around education, how distance education has been instrumental during the COVID times and how it can be a way forward as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.